So welcome to today's webinar. Just to introduce ourselves first, my name is Claire Tilley. I'm the Head of Workforce Education Training and Standards at the British Psychological Society. I'm joined today by Laura.
Hi everyone, so I'm Laura Smith. I'm the Workforce Development Manager at the BPS.
So what we're doing today is we just wanted to really put it out there, the work that we've been doing, a significant amount of work for society, with a large volume of it actually taking place over the last 2 years, and Laura and I have been very heavily involved in that work. We're now at a point where we're ready to be communicating that work to both the public and those in the workforce, and today is really an introductory webinar to start to do that. So the way that today is going to run, just to let you all know that the mics and video will be muted and off throughout. We do have a Q&A function, so if you've got questions that you think of throughout the presentation, please do add them in the Q&A box, which is just at the bottom of your screen. You can see there. You are able as well to upvote questions, so if there's a question that is particularly relevant and it's already been asked, please do upvote that, and we'll make sure that we speak about that question at the end. We will be also sending further information out after the event, so if there's anything that isn't covered today that you're really keen to know about, please do look out for that further information. This will be recorded and sent out and available to you, so you can share amongst wider colleagues if you so desire. And we also have a dedicated inbox email that we've set up so that we can then start to capture your feedback and also any queries that you've got following this event. So the webinar will cover the value of the psychological workforce and how the BPS is supporting recognition of these roles, why registration for the non-regulated roles is important, so we'll cover that and the work that we've been doing around the registration scheme, which we're shortly due to launch. We'll also give an overview of the individual workforce registration schemes in terms of the specific roles. So Laura will go into a bit of detail about the specific roles that we'll be registering. And then, as I say, we've got a Q&A session. We've set aside an hour and a half for this. We may not need all that time, we may do, depending on the amount of queries and questions that we get at the end and the conversation that emerges there. So just to let you know that we've set aside an hour and a half, but we may not need it. Thanks, Laura. If you could just go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so to start with, we've really split this presentation into three parts, and Laura and I will be kind of co-hosting together today. We wanted really to start with who are the wider psychological workforce, and what do we mean when we talk about the wider psychological professions. So as we are aware, the practitioner routes for psychology, which lead to the protected titles, have very defined routes of training. But over the past few years, and particularly since the introduction of IAPT in the NHS England model, we've seen a growth of psychological professions who aren't regulated by law, don't have necessarily a professional body affiliated specifically for them. And we've also seen a lot of growth in this workforce. So these roles are typically, in the early kind of intervention space. So these are psychological professions who work in the primary settings, but also those that work alongside those in other more specialist settings. What we really set about thinking is we were already accrediting the psychological wellbeing practitioner programme, and we wanted to think about what more we could do in this space given the growth that we anticipated on the back of some of the key initiatives across the 4 nations, about how we train and quality assure a future-ready workforce which will meet the demands of changing society. The workforce developments are increasingly also leading to new roles and non-regulated roles where the work is a form of applied psychological practice. And there is a big focus on community provision, and particularly children and young people. We've seen a big investment in that area. And one example of that is the role of the educational mental health practitioner, and we'll go into talk about the roles in a bit more detail later. So in terms of the changes, the workforce is driving the need to think about new ways about how we train and educate future-ready, competent and psychologically literate people who can utilise their knowledge and competencies to meet real-world challenges as they emerge. We have been a supporter and a collaborator to develop the professions for quite some time now, and we'll go into a timeline of the work that's been happening in this area to date. And our broader mission as a representative body for psychology and psychologists in the UK involves us thinking about evidence-based psychological interventions in a different range of settings, including health and social care, schools, prisons, and other areas of society where these practitioners are actually working. We recognise the importance of ensuring quality and also a sustainable workforce. So to date, we know that there is some issues around retention in this area of the workforce. So we want to use our platform and our infrastructure, if you like, to help people to see this as a professional home, a career opportunity where there's CPD and associated benefits, and you can share practice across interdisciplinary areas. So we've been supporting the workforce development of existing new roles and the registration of individual practitioners in those roles, and we'll go into more detail about those shortly. So as I mentioned previously, we've been involved in these developments for quite some time, predating both Laura and myself's time at the BPS, but as I say, things have ramped up significantly over the past couple of years, in particular in relation to the long-term plan. So historically, the Society focused its education and training activities on protected titles and the routes through to those. But with the introduction of the IAP programme and the vision of the wider psychological workforce and what that might look like changing, and the investment in mental health services, we've now started to broaden out our scope around education and training to think about registration of these roles, to think about accrediting new roles. We've also been heavily involved in working with employers, the NHS and other providers to develop apprenticeship routes for some of these roles. And we've also been looking to develop new accreditation standards for the new roles as these emerge. It's worthwhile saying that whilst a lot of this work has been driven by the long-term plan and many papers which have come out from NHS England, Health Education England and other bodies, we are taking a Four Nations approach to what we're doing. So we already accredit a PWP programme in Northern Ireland. Whilst there isn't a step care model of care in Northern Ireland, it is obviously a role that is useful for the workforce there. The IAP model has been quite a driving force, but we are now starting to see similar initiatives developing also in Scotland and Wales. And there'll be more detail about the roles in their specific contexts in the latter part of the presentation. But this hopefully gives you a kind of oversight of the work that we've been doing. This isn't a new initiative. This is something that we've been working on for a significant amount of time. And I think it's fair to say that we're actually quite excited now to be bringing this to you and to be offering registration for individuals in these roles. Next slide, please, Laura. The driver in NHS in England has been really broadly quite a few papers, the 5-year forward view and the long-term plan and the green paper on children and young people's mental health, which have driven a lot of the initiatives in England. But obviously the BPS is a British society, so we recognise the broad need to support wider growth across the Four Nations. But if we just focus on England for now, so building on those papers, in early 2019, the long-term plan was published, which set out the NHS future vision for its workforce across specific areas, with mental health being one of the key areas there. And the plan outlined really ambitious and challenging growth, but it was widely supported by a welcome commitment to investment. So across children and young people's mental health and improving access to psychological therapies, so the IAP services alone, the workforce growth of over 10,000 new staff is required. So that's a huge challenge for the NHS to meet. And with the rate of funding committed to the growth outstripping the rate committed to the overall mental health spend in total, it's quite clear that this is a key focus of the government in supporting growth in the mental health workforce, particularly at the prevention end. So thinking about those IAP settings and that primary care. The ambitious proposal set out to expand psychological approaches to healthcare at a much faster pace than ever before. And this is really a huge transformation for the NHS. So growing our professions and developing the way that they train and work is incredibly important to ensure quality and competency of those individuals and to assure the public of the safety of these roles in delivering that care. So in terms of the adult IAP, the overarching ambition is to continue to extend those services for adults and older adults with common mental health problems and with a focus with long-term conditions. So by 23-24, an additional 380,000 adults and older adults should be able to access those services. And to support that is going to need the growth of the workforce that we've outlined. As this is a priority area and long-term conditions and IAPs are a priority for the NHS, we are expecting that all areas and commissioning bodies are going to need to meet the needs of their local populations by accessing these roles. And the outcomes for people like young adults and those from minority ethnic backgrounds are also a key consideration. So there is a focus on increasing diversity in the workforce also. Next, I just wanted to talk about the mental health support for children and young people, which is set out separately in England. There's been specific roles actually created here, and again, Laura will talk about those in a bit more detail later in the presentation. But the 5-year forward view for mental health and the NHS long-term plan set out quite important ambitions to transform the mental health support for children and young people. And this included enabling 345,000 more 0 to 25-year-olds access to services. And this was on top of 70,000 aged 0 to 18 years that were already outlined in the further document by 2021. And these roles that were developed to really deliver evidence-based psychological support to vulnerable children with complex trauma, and to develop pathways that extend across mental health and adult services to cover young adults at the age of 25. By the end of the long-term plan delivery, we intend that 100% of young people that need a service will be offered one. So in terms of the workforce challenge that presents, that's huge in terms of the need for growth in existing roles and also the development and delivery of new roles. It's increased the CYP children, young people and adult psychological professions, and a lot of this is being done via the delivery of mental health support teams, which are community-based in educational settings. The senior psychological practitioners working with these new roles to deliver interventions in schools and other areas where they previously haven't been. On the back of the COVID pandemic, we've seen an increase in the need for mental health support and a further need to deliver this expansion. So the growth that we've seen has actually been accelerated, and that's on the back of actually seeing the slight slowdown of growth due to NHS services being tasked to respond to the pandemic. So what we've actually now seen is that mental health support teams are going to now be rolled forward to be delivered from April 2022 and not 2023, which was originally planned. So there is now a need for us to accelerate our response to growing these roles. And this is why we really think that these developments are very, very timely. We've seen a lot of growth in other areas of psychological professions, which is very, very positive. So there's been a 60% increase in clinical psychology commissioning, and we anticipate that this might continue into next year as well. This is really, really exciting and very, very positive for the psychological professions, particularly as those roles are needed to offer supervision for these roles in the lower parts of the workforce in terms of primary care and community settings. Thanks, Laura. I don't know if you can get on to the next slide. So that's been some focus on the NHS England, but as I say, we are the British Psychological Society, so we do focus across the 4 nations. Laura's going to go into detail about some of the specific roles in those areas in a later part of the slide in the presentation. But we just wanted to really talk about these briefly now, just to let you all know, for those of you that are from the 4 nations, that you are very much in scope of the developments that we are working on at the moment. So for Scotland, the Clinical Associates in Applied Psychology role has been in place since 2006, so very embedded role within that workforce. They've really been able to address significant challenges in improving access to mental health in Scotland through that role. And we've actually also seen the addition and growth of the clinical psychology and supervisory workforce needed to support that role in Scotland. So that's been a very, very positive example of how psychological practitioners can actually, positively impact on the care that they're giving in those settings. The role in Scotland, so the Clinical Associate in Applied Psychology, is different to the Clinical Associate Psychologist, which is in England. That's a more recent development that was developed in the Southwest by the apprenticeship route. And it's a slightly different role because they are trained in slightly different specific population care. So in Scotland, you would qualify as either an adult or child, whereas in England, there is a more generalist qualification, and you would work possibly in either of those settings, depending on which route you took. In Northern Ireland, we've also worked closely with commissioning bodies and service leads and identified that there are potentials for these roles to be implemented there. One of the key aspects that we want to solve, I guess, in terms of the Northern Ireland workforce need, is that with the absence of regulation, historically the psychological professions have been overlooked, potentially in favour of mental health nursing, and other professions, because they of course are regulated. And in terms of managing the risk, those commissioning bodies really saw that the regulation offered a further way to manage the risk in terms of clinical competency and fitness to practice. So we see registration as a way to encourage confidence in these roles, to grow the workforce not only in England but also across the 4 nations. And in Wales, they're looking also at the moment to commission clinical associates in psychology using the model that's been established in England that we now accredit and is now delivered through the apprenticeship scheme, to deliver effective care in an area that they see is a specific need that's not yet been met. Thanks, Laura. Next slide. So we've done a lot to date, as the timeline probably shows, and this is part of our wider work that we do. Obviously, as an accrediting body, we work very, very closely with employers, including the large health and care professional bodies across the 4 nations. We've worked very, very closely with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education and colleagues across a range of large trusts to develop new routes and roles in terms of apprenticeships, which give paid employment opportunities for those that want to go into the psychological professions. And we see that as a way to help to increase diversity and to help to make these an inclusive profession. That's available for all who have an interest in psychology and want to be working in the field. Associated with that, we've also been developing in the background new membership grades and associated member benefits. So we recognise at the minute that there's not a specific home for those that are in these professions where perhaps you haven't done a psychology accredited degree as your sort of first level of higher education. We recognise that we want to develop our grades and our member benefits to now have a place for those people that is specific for those that perhaps haven't got a graduate basis for chartership awarded degree. So what we're now doing is looking at that, and Laura will talk again a bit more about what that looks like. We're currently in a consultation on that at the moment, and we hope to be able to launch those new grades at the end of this year into early next year. But the registering of these roles isn't predicated by that, and we already have an opportunity for people to become members if you haven't actually got a GBC accredited degree. And a lot of this work is also about information and guidance and raising public confidence and awareness of the new roles. So we've recently recruited a careers manager, and we've also just gone out to recruit for partnership and careers lead, who will be working closely with employers and higher education providers, schools and colleges to think about these in a career framework, to think about opportunities for CPD, to offer CPD internally, both at the BPS, and also to signpost to effective CPD elsewhere. So we want to really just do all of this and bring this together as a whole piece to ensure that not only is the training and education quality, not only is there a diversity of routes and roles available for people that want to work in psychological professions, but also that post-qualification we can contribute to ensuring the quality and governance of those roles through a fitness to practice framework via the registration scheme, which Laura will talk about more in detail later. So I'm now going to hand over to Laura, who's going to talk a little bit more in detail about what we've been doing in specific areas, including accreditation, working with employers, and then it will be back to me to talk specifically about the registration for new roles. So I'll hand over to you if that's okay, Laura.
Thanks, Claire, and sorry everyone for the issues with the slides. I hope that they are clear enough. I've taken it off of slideshow just because it seems to be sticking, so my apologies for that. So just to then, as Claire said, go into a bit more detail then about some of these areas that we've been working on. So at the BPS, we've got a well-established accreditation function. So we've got relationships with over 120 UK universities, and we operate a model known as accreditation through partnership. Now, this is the process by which we work with education providers to ensure quality standards in education and training are met by programmes on an ongoing basis. As Claire mentioned, the Society designed the accreditation process for the adult IAPS PWP training, and that was on behalf of the National IAP programme back in 2009. So these standards were then integrated into our accreditation portfolio. In March last year, we launched the accreditation standards for applied psychology programs for associate psychologists. And these standards are used to accredit the training for the clinical associates in applied psychology in Scotland. And this is where the standards were actually piloted. And they will also be used to accredit the new clinical associate in psychology, the CAPS training in England that's been developed. We have also developed accreditation standards for the children and young people's roles, so the children's wellbeing practitioner and the education mental health practitioner roles. And very similar to PWP, they are underpinned by a national curriculum. So we've consulted on these standards with training providers and a number of other stakeholders last year, and these are currently going through an approval process with NHS England and Health Education England. We're hoping to receive an outcome on those standards by June this year. So we're really well placed to offer quality assurance and training through the development and delivery of new accreditation standards. And these standards can be applied to a broad range of training, including the relevant competencies and curricula, and integrated into the standards, which are structured around a set of core standards. And accreditation is really important because it ensures that there's robust, coherent training routes and that there's fair and reliable assessment for training for those entering the psychological workforce. And we see that accreditation of training forms part of the wider quality assurance piece to ensure that the training maintains the appropriate standard, and then accreditation being the gateway into individual registration. So we'd really see this as the blueprint for NHS roles. So accrediting training of programs and then individual registration with an appropriate professional body. And we see this in other areas of healthcare as well, like, for instance, medicine, where the roles are regulated and registered in this way. So in terms of other areas that we've been involved in, apprenticeship routes are a key one. And we know that apprenticeships help to create a skilled, diverse, flexible and motivated workforce. And they can really help to improve the diversity of the workforce by opening up employment opportunities to more diverse entrants. We really need to work to ensure that recruitment focuses on this. So the BPS worked with employers, the NHS, Health Education England to drive forward new training routes and think about how the NHS uses its apprenticeship levy as one of the biggest levy paying organisations, how it can use its levy to grow the psychological workforce. So we've been involved in the trailblazer groups for both the PWP apprenticeship and the English CAP apprenticeship. So working with them to actually develop the apprenticeship and make sure we're safeguarding the robustness of the profession through quality assurance and assessment. So BPS accreditation actually underpins these apprenticeship standards. So for the PWP apprenticeship, a BPS accredited training is actually mandated within the qualification. And what this means is that any apprenticeship providers delivering the PWP apprenticeship will need to have BPS accreditation for their training. We've recently established a separate limited company called BPS Assessment and Awards, and this company is now approved as an endpoint assessment organisation. So it will firstly be offering endpoint assessment services for the PWP apprenticeship. So endpoint assessment is used to assess apprentices and make sure that they're capable of doing the job before they receive their apprenticeship certificate. So we expect that BPS Assessment and Awards will be carrying out endpoint assessment services from October, when the first round of PWP apprentices come through. And we very much want to continue working with existing and new apprenticeship routes in mental health to support quality assurance and assessment activities. And we really see apprenticeships as the opportunity to bridge the gap and to create a route for disadvantaged groups, or those that may have left the education system to gain education and training through an apprenticeship model. We also see that apprenticeships are an opportunity to help and support people moving through the workforce. So we know that there's apprenticeship support roles such as the assistant practitioner, where individuals in this role will have prior experience of working in a mental health setting. And this then provides a structured route through to a more sustainable model to support those individuals to then perhaps gain and work through to a more elevated position, such as going in onto the PWP apprenticeship. So we're going to make sure that we continue to work with employers across the 4 nations for any new apprenticeship developments, but also bearing in mind that there are different structures and governance structures for across the 4 nations in terms of how these streams are established. So another area is enhancing our careers offer, and we're looking to do that from pre-tertiary through to postgraduate careers advice. So as Claire's mentioned, we recognise that there's a gap in careers information, particularly for the wider psychological professions, and that psychological professional careers can be really difficult to navigate, and we really need to help address this. So there are a number of areas that we're working on. So we've got a new virtual learning environment platform that's called BPS Learn. We're offering various resources in CPD, and these can very much be tailored towards the needs of those in the wider psychological workforce. As Claire mentioned, we've very recently recruited a careers manager who will join the BPS in the summer to lead on a number of new developments. This will include working with employers to support them in their workforce need, and for those pursuing or interested in pursuing a career in psychology to better understand what advice and guidance they need along the way. So there will be a dedicated careers strategy for these psychological professional roles. And then some of the other areas of focus are working with employers and the arm's length bodies to promote NHS careers, developing our student membership offer and offering a range of personalised resources, looking at our GCSE and pre-university resources for teachers. We've got a teacher's toolkit that was launched last year. And we want to support those that have not studied psychology and widen access to the psychological professions by providing information about various support roles and career progression into other psychological roles. So opening the doors to a much wider framework. We also want to support those that are in training to transition into the workforce. So we'll be really thinking about our newly qualified membership offer and how this will differ for those that are more embedded in the workforce. So looking at what tailored events, resources, advice and guidance we can provide. So we really want to make sure we're providing high quality, accessible careers, guidance, resources to the schools, the public, trainees and employers. So another key area is the development of an individual practitioner registration, and I will be going into more detail later on in the slides about the wider psychological workforce register. Just to give a sort of brief summary, looked at and developed a voluntary registration scheme for psychological professions that aren't regulated by law. And we know that in the absence of registration, there remains quite a high turnover of the workforce, particularly within NHS England. We see year on year the percentage of PWPs leaving the profession within 2 years, and this has continued to increase. And the fact that there isn't a professional home with clear progression pathways is actually often cited as a reason for this churn. And we may see this replicated across other roles like the children and young people's roles, where they're not yet fully established in the workforce. So we really need to create opportunities for recognition and growth within these roles. And registration really raises the profile and standing of these professionals to give parity esteem for these roles. So so we've developed a voluntary registration scheme for a number of the roles that we'll be talking about. And we're currently applying for the Professional Standards Authority quality mark. And this is a government-backed initiative to protect the public. So we really see that registration of these roles offers appropriate oversight of the training routes, entry requirements, and then ongoing development of these roles. As I say, adding a further layer of parity and esteem. And this is really important given the anticipated growth in the workforce to support the NHS and individuals in those roles and initiatives across the 4 nations as well. So as Claire's mentioned, we've got our member grades review. So the Society is currently carrying out a review of its membership grades and considering what changes could be made to its structure. So back in 2020, last year, we asked members and others, including those working in psychology that may not be members, what they liked and disliked about the existing membership structure and how they would like to see it evolve. So through this consultation and in response to feedback, the proposals have been redrafted. So there are a number of principles that underpin this review. So inclusivity, ensuring that membership should provide a sense of belonging to everyone in the community. So not just those that have taken perhaps the more traditional, well-known routes up to chartered membership, offering flexibility. So membership is open to professionals who've taken a wide range of career routes and recognising and celebrating that, and ensuring it's fit for purpose, especially for the changing psychological professionals, so that people can enjoy different progression routes. So some of the key changes in the member grades proposal is the introduction of new grades of membership. So there's the associate member, and this is tailored to the wider psychological workforce, so giving them a home and enabling us to provide member benefits that are tailored to the needs of this workforce. And there's also a full member grade, and this is for recognition of those that are more than 5 years after their graduation and their career continues to develop in the psychological professions. So this may include those that are en route to charter membership, but also includes those whose career builds on their undergraduate degree, but is not necessarily focused on attaining charter membership and is more looking at sort of the psychological professions, the other roles within the psychological professions. So the consultation, although on the side it says that it's launching next week, I think that is now live on the website. So it's been very clear for many of our members, they feel that there's a need for change. So we want to ensure that we've been thorough in exploring exactly what and how membership should change. So this open consultation is now live on the website. We'd encourage you to have a look at it and take part and tell us what you think. So just to summarise sort of the first kind of area that we've been talking about then. So as the leading professional body for psychology in the UK, we acknowledge our responsibility to offer a more comprehensive framework and support for this workforce. All of this activity supports the successful delivery and promotion of education, training and careers in the wider workforce, and supporting the growth of these professions in the widest sense, from registration, post-registration, all the learning activities that underpin that. And this includes robust quality assurance and assessment to ensure public confidence in these psychological roles and to promote the discipline of psychology. So we really feel that delivering all this work will help to enable wider recognition for these roles in the workforce and provide a valuable offer for them and for new roles in the future. So I'm going to hand back over to Claire now, and she is going to talk a bit more about registration for non-regulated roles and why it's important.
Thanks, Laura. I've just been looking in the comments and I think there's been some problems with my sound. Can you hear me okay, Laura?
I can. I'll make sure that I'm
okay.
On mute as well.
I do apologise if anybody's having problems with my sound today. I've checked all my speaker settings and everything seems to be okay, but if there is problems, please do pop a comment in the Q&A, and we'll see if there's anything more that we can do. So as Laura said, registration, and I think it's worth at this juncture to kind of think about the difference and the way that we talk about registration being different to accreditation. So within the society, we talk about accreditation, and we talk about accreditation of programmes or courses of study. So we accredit courses and programmes with university providers, and once you've been on that course or programme of study, you then have the opportunity to join the society in one of the associated roles, whether that's graduate member or chartered if you've done a doctorate. When we talk about registration, we're very much talking about individuals in roles and how we will then register them in terms of looking at their actual practice and their competency and their training and background to enter them onto a register. So we've specifically made that distinction between accreditation and registration. I know that they are used interchangeably in the sector, depending on which professional body you're talking to, but for the BPS, registration is very much about the individual and not about the actual programme of study. Can you just click to the next slide, please, Laura? Thank you. So in doing this work, what we've really considered as the BPS is what does this actually mean to individual practitioners? What does it mean to patients, and what does it mean to the public? So in terms of the individual practitioner, the benefits we feel of registration is that there is a benchmark of standard that goes beyond the qualification stage. So we know that through accreditation, we stipulate minimum competency for people to qualify in a specific role. But beyond that, there isn't really anything in the absence of any regulatory function to be checking that people are maintaining that competence. So you could have somebody that's in a role for a significant period of time and not really have any kind of check that their competency has been maintained, or that they are maintaining competence with new innovations, perhaps in practice, or thinking about psychological professions. So this is a way that we can actually do that through recording CPD and offering CPD, and getting people, when they sign up to registration, to commit that they will maintain that CPD. And we monitor that through a process of audit, which is outlined in the documents. When you register it, it tells you about how we manage that. It also talks about a commitment to their area of practice, so thinking about the scope of practice. Registration is very specific, that in the particular roles, which are very specific in terms of the training that people do, we talk about scope of practice. So it's practitioners are signing up so that they won't go beyond their scope of practice, and that they will appropriately refer people into other areas of practice if that's necessary. It also means that you are maintaining the required skills, knowledge and competencies in detail. So as I say, through CPD, we check that, and there's an audit, and you will be uploading to a log to show that you're doing that. And it also allows you to grow your own development in terms of a professional community. So thinking about the networks that the BPS can provide in interdisciplinary thinking and learning, sharing best practice, undertaking events, undertaking CPD, that's very specific to your roles, but also thinking about the fact that you probably do work in interdisciplinary settings, and what can that bring you in terms of value, in terms of upskilling and developing your practice in learning from those other disciplines that are within the home of the society. And it also allows us to make sure that you're committing to a professional code of conduct. So with registration, there is a code of conduct that sits on top of the member code of conduct, which is specifically around fitness to practice. So you sign up to that as part of your registration, and there will be opportunities if people are found to be in breach of that practice code, that we will have a mechanism to address that through the registration scheme. And for patients and public, this then means that they have a confidence in these roles. So particularly with new roles, where they are less established, I think it's quite important for patients to understand who those roles are, what they can deliver, what their scope of practice is, that they're able to go to a central source, which in this case will be the register, to check that somebody has committed to maintaining those high levels of standards and practice, and that they've also got a place where if they're not happy with the care that they receive, that they can actually complain, and that will be managed fairly and robustly, and will be seen as in the best interest of both the complainant but also the practitioner. So we've developed a whole network of processes really around that, which sit on top of, as I say, our member code of conduct. And in signing up to this, that then gives that as I say, that confidence for employers as well, that when they're actually employing somebody, that there is a professional body that is looking at their competency and will put in place sanctions if there's any breach of that kind of fitness to practice code. So that's very important to us, and we feel it's going to be quite important to practitioners as well, who will be invited to join the register when it launches. Thanks, Laura. Next slide, please. So just talking a bit more detail about what it means to employers. So we've worked very closely with employers across the 4 nations, and there's some quite clear distinctions and differences across the 4 nations in terms of workforce need and how registration is recognised. But one thing which is clearly universal is that in the absence of registration, there's clearly a gap that needs to be met, and this is where the BPS has stepped forward to suggest that we can meet this need for the psychological professions. At the moment, it's around specific roles, and we've outlined those in this presentation. Laura will be talking about those roles, but we actually see this going forward as potentially a platform where we can expand to also cover other roles, and I think that's really important because there are quite a few psychological professions who are working out there in various spaces where there isn't any professional recognition or there isn't a professional home for them. And that governance and oversight is very important for employers. When you're a commissioner and you're thinking about commissioning, it's sometimes easier to think about the more traditional roles which are regulated, such as occupational therapists or nurses, as a way to meet that workforce need. But what we find is that there's actually competency within the psychological workforce which could also meet that need, which is overlooked because there isn't that extra layer of governance. So essentially BPS is taking on the risk management of that through the registration scheme, and it's quite a step change for us. We were previously a regulator some years back for the psychological practitioner routes in terms of the protected titles, and since that went to HCPC we stepped back from that. But we are essentially taking on a similar role to HCPC in a non-mandatory, non-statutory or legally binding way. So these registers will be voluntary, but we hope that by working with employers across the 4 nations, we will be able to encourage people to essentially buy up to this scheme as a mechanism as part of their recruitment profile, to be checking registration, to be checking that people actually have registered with the professional body, to make sure that they are actually signing up to a level of minimum fitness to practice, ongoing CPD, and the commitment to maintain fitness to practice throughout their career in that role. This is particularly important in places like Northern Ireland, whereby, as I say, they don't have the same model that we see in the other nations in terms of stepped care. So it gives commissioners a confidence to be able to employ these people in these roles, knowing that there is another layer of governance that will highlight any risk and will be able to respond to that appropriately through the processes that we've set up. Thanks, Laura. Just on to the next slide. Thank you. So one of the more recent reasons why we've sort of set about thinking that this is a good thing and is the right time to be doing it is with the COVID pandemic. There has obviously been a great interest in mental health and responses to mental health and how people respond to trauma and things like that. And what we've actually seen emerging is some very poor practice from quite a number of training providers who are now advertising courses such as the one that we've got on screen at the moment, whereby suggesting that you can become a psychological wellbeing practitioner for £10 through an online course. And actually further detail of this particular programme, when you actually go into the detail, it does actually state that you will be able to work with patients, which is a huge risk given that this is a course that can be done by anybody online, unregulated, and is claiming that they will then be able to work with patients. In particular, although we're not able to regulate and protect the titles in the same way that HCPC legally protects the titles of practitioner psychologists, we recognise that a lot of this work will also be about ensuring that the public understand what these roles mean, what they are, what they deliver, and the training routes that people will have had to have undertaken to basically register with the organisation. And that's very important because if we're seeing the practice of these roles being used by training bodies as a kind of short course way to get a very basic understanding of wellbeing practice, and then basically saying you can go out and actually do that in public. It's very important, therefore, that we have somewhere where we can point to, and in this case, a register whereby somebody can check the validity of somebody's training and practice claims. From a regulatory perspective, that's very, very important to us, because we hope that through the registering scheme and through uptake and buy-in, as we grow this development, that we will be able to stamp out this poor practice, which we're starting to see more of out there on social media, as I say, and through other platforms whereby people are promoting short online courses, very low cost courses, usually only a few hours each, but promoting them as effectively routes through to practice, which is incredibly worrying and is something that we want to address through registration. Thanks, Laura. So I'm just going to hand over now to Laura, and Laura's going to go into now a lot more detail about the actual register and registration. So Laura, I'm going to just put myself in mute and hand over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so going to now talk about the BPS wider psychological workforce register in a bit more detail. So the register itself, we'll be registering the 5 roles that are going to be on the register, all of which aren't regulated by law. So we've got the psychological wellbeing practitioner, the children's wellbeing practitioner, and the education mental health practitioner. And these roles have been termed wellbeing practitioner roles. And this is in line with agreements with NHS England as to actually how we describe this group of professionals. So the register for these roles was developed in line with NHS England's specification, which I'm going to go into more detail on the next slide. But as Claire has mentioned as well, although some of these initiatives have been driven by NHS England, we're very much maintaining a full nation view, and we'll be recognising roles that have undertaken relevant training across 4 nations. Then there's the associate psychology roles. So there's the clinical associate in applied psychology, the CAP role in Scotland, and the clinical associate in psychology CAP role in England. So to go into a bit more detail then about the roles that we'll be registering. So the wellbeing practitioner roles, NHS England actually provided a formal specification outlining a number of requirements that a scheme would need to meet these roles for the scheme to be recognised by NHS England. So both the BPS and the British Association for Behavioural and Cognitive Psychotherapies have developed individual registration schemes for these roles. We've been working together over the past year to make sure that we're aligning on mutually agreed standards for entry onto the register, and also for managing complaints linked to registration. So very recently, both of these registers have been approved by NHS England, because they've both been designed to meet the specification requirements, and therefore both registers are expected to be recognised by NHS England and the frameworks that they operate in, such as including these details within the IAP manual. And this is because, although voluntary, the NHS and other organisations are looking at moving towards requiring registration for psychological practitioners as good practice to be registered. So the registers held by the BPS and by the BABCP will provide individual registration for wellbeing practitioner roles, and we'll be starting with the psychological wellbeing practitioner role for launch. So both BPS and BABCP registers are expected to launch in the first quarter of this year. From the BPS perspective, we have a planned launch of June for this role. And the reason that we'll be starting with PWP first and the EMHP and CWP roles will follow is that we need course accreditation to be in place for these roles to join the register. So this is, as I said in my previous slide, currently undergoing approval with NHS England and Health Education England. So we expect to hear an outcome very soon. So both the BABCP and the BPS have been seeking approval from the Professional Standards Authority to accredit voluntary registration schemes. And this was actually a requirement set by NHS England. So we'll be, and we are currently working with NHS England and the BABCP on communicating this recent approval of the registration scheme. Do expect to hear further information from all of us about this scheme, and we're planning on running another event with NHS England and BABCP for the registered launch of these roles. Just to reiterate as well, that as we've said, the NHS England specification has driven this, but both organisations have maintained a full nation view. So we'll be recognising individuals in these roles across 4 nations that have undertaken the relevant training and are working within the specified system of care for their role. So that includes, an appropriate step care model and working under supervision. So for the clinical associates in applied psychology role in Scotland, we've been working closely with colleagues in Scotland to progress these developments. So working with NHS Education for Scotland, heads of psychology Scotland, programme directors, and been in conversations with individuals in the National CAP Forum as well, all who are supportive of these developments of the scheme. Particularly having a fitness to practice process is seen as a significant and positive step in terms of the quality assurance for CAPs. And it's been said that this would be helpful for employers when making decisions about how and when to employ CAP graduates. So registration with a professional body has sometimes been cited as required for posts, particularly those that sit outside the well-established clinical structures. So as CAPs are trained to work with a specific population, this is either the adult route or working with children, young people and their families, they will register against the population that they've been trained to be working with, so working within an appropriate framework for their role. And the clinical associates in psychology, the English role, similarly, we've been working with employers of CAPs, particularly down in the Southwest where this initiative came from, and they really see the value of registration in ensuring that extra layer of oversight for the role and alongside providing recognition for CAPs. So similarly, CAPs have a more prescribed range of activities and do work with specific populations. So they will also register against the population that they're working with, so either an adult population or children, young people and families. So to just give a bit more detail about the Professional Standards Authority, so the PSA are an independent organisation accountable to UK Parliament, and they provide healthcare regulation. So they actually regulate the Health and Care Professions Council. So they assess the performance of HCPC and other regulators against the standards of good regulation. And for PSA, public protection is at the heart of everything that they do. So alongside their healthcare regulation, they also assess and accredit organisations that provide voluntary registration and registration for practitioners in unregulated occupations. This is a government-backed initiative to protect the public, and they provide a quality mark which demonstrates commitment to health, wellbeing and safety of the public. So the BPS, we applied to the PSA back in March. So we submitted our application outlining how the new wider psychological workforce register will meet the 11 standards set out by the PSA. So once the PSA receive an application, they call out for further information. So you may have seen there was a share your experience communication that went out on our website and through the PSA, to invite individuals to provide information about the BPS, and they use that then to carry out a full assessment before providing a decision. So this closed on the 24th of April, so we'll be expecting to sort of hear from the PSA in due course. And this was a requirement for NHS England approval, but we intended to seek it for the register anyway, to demonstrate our commitment to public safety and ongoing quality in registration. So the register itself, a bit more detail about registration. To join the register, you will need to be a member of the BPS, and I'll talk through the different options in a slide in a moment. You'll then be able to apply for the register when it's launched against the role that you're employed in, and there'll be distinct requirements for each role. And the membership and customer service team will then carry out the necessary checks, and then you'll receive formal approval, and you'll need to renew your registration fee annually and meet the CPD requirements. So there's a one-off application fee of £27, and then there are two different registration prices for the different roles. And we carried out sort of set practice in terms of linking registration costs to the NHS Agenda for Change funding. So that's why the roles are costed differently. And we've also benchmarked against other professional bodies and their registration schemes, but also being mindful of the importance of keeping the scheme low cost and affordable. So for the wellbeing practitioner registration, the fee will be £50. And for the associate psychology, the fee will be £62. And then on successful completion of your registration, you'll then appear on the public register. You'll have a unique registration number. You'll receive a certificate of your registration, and then a number of benefits, including reduced fee CPD and specific and tailored CPD to the role that you're registering with. So to talk about the eligibility requirements then, so joining and becoming a member of the BPS means that you've agreed to abide by and operate within the member code of conduct, and you will need to have completed a BPS accredited training program for your role, and as you register, you have to upload a certificate as part of the evidence of this. Confirmation of current employment within the specified system of care. So we've actually agreed what these system of care definitions look like. So for the wellbeing practitioner roles, this has been agreed with NHS England and BABCP. And then for the associate psychology roles, we've worked with employers to make sure that the definition appropriately describes the roles that the CAPS in England and CAPS in Scotland should be working within. So you'll need to confirm that you're operating within this system of care as part of your application. We will ask for a supervisor reference as well as additional evidence that you're working in this role under the appropriate supervision. You'll also need 6 months experience of working within the specified system of care, and this can include time spent as a trainee in these roles. And then you'll need to read and agree to abide by a fitness to practice framework. And there's a number of declarations of fitness practice for your role. So a bit more detail on each of those then. So becoming a member of the BPS. So if you're not already a member and you're planning to join the wider psychological workforce register, we'd really encourage you to join us and become a member, so that then you can very easily apply for registration once the register launches. And there are 2 options for registration. So if you've completed an accredited undergraduate or conversion course, then you're eligible for graduate registration, and you'll receive the full graduate benefits, including access to hundreds of conferences and events at discounted rates, the psychologists, access to the Society's academic journals, the use of the Society title, and a range of other benefits. But we do acknowledge that some individuals will not have completed an undergraduate or conversion degree because it's not a requirement for the roles, particularly for the wellbeing practitioner roles, whereas it is for the associate psychology training. So if you're not eligible for graduate membership, you would need to apply to be an affiliate subscriber. And in recognition of this, that you won't be receiving the same membership benefits, you'll receive a 50% discount off of your membership. So we've put the customer support details on the slide here, and they're also available on our website. So if you contact our customer support team, they'll be more than happy to provide you with a discount code that will give you 50% off your affiliate subscriber membership. So this is just to say an interim measure until the new member grades are in place, for which then there will be a membership home for the wider psychological workforce roles and equivalent member benefits. And we really want to make sure that all the roles in the psychological workforce are part of a community where they'll have access to and insight across a range of psychological professions, peer-to-peer networking, and interdisciplinary knowledge exchange. So we see this as really beneficial and important. So this is just an interim solution for now. So yeah, if you're planning to join the register and you're not yet a member, please do get in touch with the customer support team. So the fitness to practice framework then, this is an extra layer of governance above the member code of conduct, and it sets out the requirements for our registrants and states in broad terms our expectations for their behaviour and conduct. So we're committed to protecting the public and promoting public confidence in the psychological practitioner roles. So to join and remain on the register, registrants must be fit to practice, and they will do this by demonstrating the following on the slide. So keeping their knowledge and skills up to date, working within their field of competence, operating within the appropriate framework for their role and under appropriate supervision, and as we'd always expect, treating service users with dignity and respect and acting with honesty and integrity. So when you sign up to the register, you'd read the fitness to practice framework and make a declaration to agree to abide by and operate within that framework. As Claire has already mentioned, we've established a robust complaints and appeals policy to investigate issues of fitness to practice in line with our objective of maintaining public protection. And this is also a requirement of the PSA to ensure that the right action is taken by the registering organisation and the individuals involved. So the complaints procedure ensures that we respond to complaints swiftly and professionally, and that we take fair and proportionate action and learn from our interactions in line with our policy. So we will have a dedicated complaints team and investigatory panel who will be responsible for investigating issues of fitness to practice, and we'll manage complaints similar to other regulatory frameworks where there's a public employer and registrant self-referral, and full details of the complaints process will be available on the website prior to launch. So in terms of CPD requirements to maintain registration, there will be required standards of supervision and CPD, and there'll be a declaration as part of the annual renewal of your registration, and this will be verified by an audit. So all roles will be expected to engage in a minimum of 5 activities, and these will be drawn up from a list of acceptable types of learning and development activities. And then a CPD reflective practice statement is required for each of those. So due to the differences across the roles, it's expected that activities would be specific to that individual role. For instance, with the PVP, having at least 3 activities related to CBT informed approaches and principles. For children and young people's roles, it was highlighted that these roles aren't solely CBT, so we've committed to supporting all aspects of practice, which is why we want to see a range of interventions, not just CBT, social learning, principles, etc. And then for the CAPS roles, we expect a number of activities relevant to their scope of practice, so working with their particular population. The supervision requirements have been based on the frameworks for the roles. So with PWP, the IAP manual, and for the children and young people's roles, this has been linked to the implementation manual. For both of the CAPs, we've been working with employers and looking at the training as to what will be required for these roles. We will have our own CPD offer for the register, and we're going to work with employers and registrants to ensure our offer is fit for purpose and offering a range of reduced fee CPD. Whilst we recognise there is a need for a national strategy, we want flexibility within the model to ensure and to allow for contextualised systems of care to meet the needs of populations within specific areas. So we really want to create a CPD offer with similar contextualisation and offer flexibility whilst remaining mindful of the national priorities and requirements, for instance, the IAP national requirements. So to record your CPD, registrants will have access to the My CPD platform, where they'll be able to plan their developments, record activities, and reflect on their learning. So for auditing is going to be carried out to ensure that registrants are practicing safely and effectively in their role, and that they're meeting the required standards of supervision and CPD to continue their registration. So there will be a random audit of a minimum percentage of registrants across each role, and this will be carried out every 2 years. It will be carried out by appropriately qualified assessors who will review the CPD and supervision of the role. And we see audit as being important for the continuous improvement of the register, and there'll be a registration committee that will review the outcome of the audit and any trends to make informed decisions about registration process and where we might need to make changes to our CPD offer new CPD, and we'll of course make sure we're working with registrants and employing bodies to seek feedback on emerging skill areas and needs. So what happens next then? So we're working to get everything in place to launch the register at the beginning of June. The register is going to firstly launch with PWPs and the CAPs in Scotland, and then we expect the children and young people's roles, CWP and EMHPs, to follow along with the CAPs as well in England once, of course, accreditation is in place. So we see it likely to be launching with PWP and CAPs in June, and then in the autumn being able to launch with these other 3 roles. So just to reiterate then, in terms of next steps, if you're interested and wanting to join the wider psychological workforce register, we would encourage you to become a member or an affiliate subscriber so that you're then ready to join the register when it launches. The cost of registration is about the same cost as a high street coffee per week, and then you'll have access to over 154 member networks, hundreds of events and workshops each year. There's the Psychologist magazine, and we're really looking to build on the content within there relating to this psychological workforce. So we'd love to hear from you about content that we can include in the magazine. And very importantly, a community of around 70,000 members through our member networks and through Member Connect that will help to share the great work that people are doing within the discipline. And there's also opportunities to volunteer and to represent your profession. So in joining the and becoming a member, you'll then be ready for when register launches, and there'll be further communication about that. And then once you're registered, you'll be on the register, which will be publicly available on the BPS website. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing so that we can go to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Laura. Problem unmuting myself there. So During that presentation, I see that there's been quite a lot of activity on the question and answer panel, which is brilliant. Thank you for asking so many questions about the process and what happens next and what we're going to do. I see you've been busy kind of upvoting questions, so I think it's probably best if we start with those that have received the most upvotes to start with, and then if Zaina could just kind of watch the bottom end, just see if there's any other questions that come in that might be most relevant as we go through these. So the first question that we've got, which is from Shanaz, is as a psychology graduate, she would like to understand what work's been done around reforming undergraduate psychology education, particularly around making it more funded in terms of allowing people to practice without having to take low or unpaid work. That's, I would say, a bigger piece of work that the society is embarking on at the moment, which is about really establishing psychology as equivalent in its esteem within not only the education but also the workforce itself. So at the moment, psychology remains very, very popular at undergraduate level. But as you say, the pathways beyond qualification at that level are not always clear in terms of how people will progress in the profession. So we see that these new roles is a starting point for that conversation, but we also think that conversation needs to expand beyond the place where it's at the moment. And there are some bigger discussions going on with higher education at the moment around funding, typically linked to things like what is the perceived value of a subject. So the society, as representative of psychology in the UK, is currently doing a large piece of work around how we will seek to meet that need for the future in terms of placing psychology as a worthwhile, high value subject that will often lead to a range of positive career outcomes for people across a range of different settings and roles. So that's a bigger piece of work that I think we need to do, and it's a piece of work that I think we need to do in collaboration with the other professional bodies and the big employers. But it is certainly a conversation that's going on at the moment, and it's something that we will be pursuing. So I hope that answers that question. The next question around career progression for Band 5 EMHP. Can they progress to Band 8, and if so, how? Or do they need to get the clinical doctorate or other professional training route, e.g. mental health nurse or social worker? So at the moment, the career progression for a Band 5 is effectively, you would need to, I think, go down an advanced clinical practice route if you wanted to not go into leadership. So, for example, we know that there is now routes for senior PWPs, and those routes are looking to be formalised in the future. And I imagine that there will be a similar approach going forward once the MHPs are more established, where there will be those career progression pathways. I think this is one of the areas that we do want to focus on, again, working in collaboration with the other professional bodies and across the 4 nations, to think about making these roles really positive career destinations, not merely stepping stones for people to get experience and then move on to another training route or pathway, which sometimes feels like going back to the beginning. So it is, again, something that we want to work with employers on to ensure that there are career pathways. But with these being very new roles, I think that development is probably a small way off at the moment, given that we need to get the accreditation standards through, get them embedded within the workforce and get them embedded within workforce planning. But we would then be seeking to speak to those that make decisions around career progression opportunities in large employers to ensure that there are pathways, clear defined pathways for these people, so they know that when they're going into study, what that pathway will be and how they can progress into employment. Just thinking, question 3, do we plan to support PWP, CWP and EMHPs to look at HCPC registration? We are effectively, I think, taking the place of HCPC registration. So obviously HCPC are a statutory regulator of health and care professions. I think in our conversations with them, given that they protect several of the practitioner routes that we accredit and that we have as members, it's been quite clear that they aren't that keen to expand their view of which roles they should be regulating. That may well change in the future. I don't think it's something that's looking to change imminently, which is why we've actually undertaken this work with BABCP to consider what registering schemes might need to be developed to ensure that we can again gain public confidence, support practitioners, offer CPD, and ensure that people are working within their scope of practice. So essentially the BPS is taking the place of HCPC, and the regulator of those bodies is the Professional Standards Authority. So we will be subject to the equivalent level of scrutiny and robust standards that the PSA applies to the HCPC. The only difference will be that we are not a statutory regulator. We're not sort of legally bound to offer that. It is done on a voluntary basis, but we do hope that through our work with large employers across the 4 nations, that is where we will encourage buy into the scheme, so that employers will recognise there is a stamp of quality in registering, and holding registration will be seen as something that is a career progression opportunity in many ways for those that actually hold it. Lilia asks, will the accreditation for EMHP and CWPs mean that the role will be a core profession? And will you be able to progress further into Band 6 roles, etc.? In terms of banding and progression, obviously that's a lot of that is enshrined in NHS and other employer processes around agenda for change and their recruitment processes. It is definitely something that we work closely with those large employers on, to encourage them to recognise these roles and open up progression routes for them. In terms of EMHPs and CWPs being a core profession, certainly in England, they are recognised within that structure as a core profession, and we will be working with other commissioning bodies and other large employers across the 4 nations to encourage that the roles as they are rolled out in other countries are also recognised as a core profession, in the way that we've seen with other roles historically. Mariella, I don't know whether you want to answer, Mariella, Laura, about practical.
Yeah, I can take that. So Mariella asked, could you explain the practical benefits of accreditation, and what will this help with career-wise, and what opportunities will it allow? So in terms of accreditation of training, accreditation means that the training that you've undertaken has met the required standards. It shows that you've completed high standards of training that then are appropriately benchmarked for you then entering the profession and practicing in your role. I think that this is probably more around individual registration. So individual registration then provides, parity of esteem for other roles that might not be registered, to show that you are meeting and continuing to work towards high standards. So because there's requirements for you to continue to meet while you're registered, so continuing your professional development, working appropriately and meeting those fitness to practice requirements. This not only evidences to the public that you're meeting those required standards, it also gives assurance to employers as well, as you move through your career, or as you progress within that role, or might change to working within a different trust or different location. By having that individual registration, that shows that you are committed to meeting high standards in your in your work. I've lost I think some of them have been bumped up, so I'm just having a look at the
Thanks, Laura. I think there's more of a comment than a question there from Sarah, acknowledging the frustration of progressing in the role, as in kind of thinking about other professions such as nurses who have more clearly defined pathways. And again, that's part of the wider work that I think we definitely want to be looking at as an organisation, working with other bodies and the big employers on that. Peter asks, can we talk about progress on apprenticeship models for associate assistant? And it's just jumped off again because somebody's obviously commented, associate assistant psychologist training in educational psychology. So in terms of the apprenticeship model, that is currently an England-based model, which is through the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. It's not that we couldn't help to develop models similar to that in other nations, but they don't have the same funding mechanisms currently. So we're working on how that might look for those in other nations. But in particular in England, around those associate assistant roles, it's certainly something that we're looking at. Obviously, it was based and emerged from the clinical psychology domain, but we now have interest from educational psychology, counselling, and also forensic as to ways that we can utilise that framework and that structure of the apprenticeship route to support developments in the other domains, to assist in terms of developing more funded pathways for a wider range of roles. So it's something that we're in discussion with the Institute for Apprenticeships Technical Education in England on. It would require an update to the standard, which is something that, again, we're exploring at the moment to see whether it's feasible and whether there is the workforce demand for those roles at that level before we progress that. So that's a conversation that we're having to complete at the moment with NHSE and other employers, such as the prison service in terms of forensic psychology. And that's something that we hope to be able to update with further at future dates. I'm just looking down, Laura, because my Q&A jumped about a bit, unfortunately, so I can't now see.
I can see a question that might be helpful in terms of Vanda's asked about what about professions that aren't those that we've mentioned, and when will they be able to join the register? So I think it's important to say that obviously we're starting with these roles as they've been identified within the NHS and through employers and through the policy and workforce needs for these roles as important to provide registration to, but that doesn't mean that we won't look at registering other roles in the future. I think it's important to say that we would look at each role on a case-by-case basis in terms of the psychological underpinning of any new roles that we might look to register, and also whether as the BPS we're the best home for those individual roles, because there may be other professional bodies that are more suitable to be the registering body. So I think in answer to that, I think it will be likely that we'll register other roles in the future, but we'll have to look at them on a case-by-case basis. But with our member grade review as well, we're hoping that by revising our membership grades, if we're not registering certain roles, there will be an appropriate membership home to enable access to other benefits of being part of a professional organisation, your CPD, your member networks, and linking up to that professional community.
Great, thanks, Laura. Just a couple of questions I could see about retrospective accreditation. I think there is the view that we would retrospectively apply accreditation to the new roles once the accreditation standards have been developed and agreed by the society and by the stakeholders. So we would be looking to apply a process of quality assurance that looks at a way to retrospectively recognise cohorts who have previously qualified prior to this actually coming in formally. I'm just going to quickly see if I can see any other.
Just to add to that, Claire, in terms of retrospective accreditation, we know for the children and young people's roles that prior to BPS accreditation being in place when it hopefully is approved in the next couple of months, Health Education England have had their own quality assurance framework, so we'll be working very closely with them as we accredit the training to look at how the programmes have met the HEE quality framework for the roles prior to BPS accreditation being in place.
Great. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions that seem to be popular quickly. There's a lot in there. I mean, I think at this stage we're just conscious of time. Thank you all so much for coming and for engaging so enthusiastically through the question and answer process. I think what Laura and I are going to do now is go away and draw out some key themes around key questions that have been asked, and we will then pull together an FAQ and send that to participants along with the recording so that you've got that to refer back to. So really, again, just want to reiterate, thank you all for taking time to come today. We very much appreciate you coming along to hear us talk about what we're doing at the BPS, and we hope to be able to do some further engagement as we move forward with delivering and actually launching the register. So thanks again to all, and thank you from me to the team at BPS for helping to host this today. Thank you.
And just to follow on from Claire and reiterate, thank you, as Claire said, very much for joining us and engaging today. I've put up a slide that's got our wider workforce email address, and this please do use this and get in touch with us if you have any questions. We are going to take the questions that we couldn't get through answering today, and we will be sending out further information to attendees to make sure that we can answer your questions, as we appreciate there's a lot that we've not been able to address today. So further information will be coming, and just thank you very much all for attending.